Currently, our misleaders drive us down the paved highway to assimilation.
What is sorry predicament? Not knowing our story as Crucians or Africans. Our leaders only know the sorry situation they see along with the mountain of misrepresentations and outright so ignorantly they drive us towards assimilation and further away from the proud and glorious history of our ancestors. What a travesty they make of themselves. All the more reason for universities to securely anchor our mental emancipation.
But also reason to be concerned. Nobody cedes power voluntarily, and I'm afraid our established leaders vested in the status quo will perceive an initiative for such an institution hold on power, which of course it is. But my concern is not that they will oppose us, rather, as my earlier allusion, it's about how they will do it. We would have no concern at all if they were opposed to us on the merits of the proposal. But I don't think our misleaders will take the high road as reactionary and intellectually of a university for our mental emancipation into a hot button racial issue, much as you described. That's the kind of propaganda we don't need. There's a fine line between pro black and anti white, and our enemies know how to exploit it.
You mean our own people? Wouldn't they want their mental emancipation too? Once the plan and purpose of the university is public, how will our leaders oppose it? Privately, maybe, but not publicly.
Tell that to William Davis. He wasn't involved, yet, even in death, he was punished for being associated with anti whiteness.
You made it sound so frightening. This isn't the 18th century, and you're not talking rebellion. It's education you're talking about, education relevant to Black people. How is anyone going to equate that to separation from anything? Unless what you're really saying is that the white establishment is already predisposed to prevent us from getting the enlightenment of mental emancipation, meaning it won't require convincing to rally the white establishment against the project. That adds up to an anti black backlash rather than an anti white anything.
Too many white people are simply guilty about what was done to us, but am quietly angry that we hold them responsible. The result is a shaky truce that both parties hope will last if only no one disturbs it. A university for black people's mental emancipation will not only be a disturbance, but a major provocation to many. It's the very kind of initiative that lends itself to racial misinterpretations and thus misunderstandings of things racial. As I've of our need for such an institution and what it could do for our economy as it becomes a hub for African descendants all over the Americas, I've had to consider the obstacles it would encounter. My study of the matter has caused me to be concerned about their deliberate misrepresentations aimed at either separating us from white people or going into some confrontation with them.
Wouldn't the public relations you described be extremely misleading? How would prospective students and supporters know the distinction of this university with the mission of mental emancipation for African descendants?
That's the easy part, as you have conceded. If explaining the difference involved with our university was the only challenge, we would be good to go. What I'm talking about is the very education our instinctively embrace. It's the information we've been quaxotoxically pursuing since captivity. I'm as confident as I can be that our curricula will attract students from as far and near, wherever African descendants might be found. The purpose of this institution will touch them.
You mentioned African psychology earlier in jest, but I've heard of different attempts at that kind of thing. PTSS is now the acronym for post traumatic slavery syndrome. If it was a serious endeavor, I certainly would be interested in that kind of stuff. Would that be the kind of course to expect?
Science is the foundation of learning, and natural science has to be the head cornerstone of our institution. As a people, we must return to the mastery of our surroundings and the physical world. This is from A to Z, from astronomy to zoology. Our people must be exposed to the fundamentals to provide to provide them with a working knowledge of all the natural sciences. On this foundation, we'll develop a first-class state-of-the-art school of engineering. It's imperative we develop as many engineers with as many specialties as we possibly can. There are the people, our future, the ones to plan, design, and build a future to amaze the physically free even more profoundly than emancipation astounded the physically enslaved. Our emphasis on the natural sciences and engineering must be intense, concentrated, and unrelenting. It has to be our foundation and the reason we excel as an institution.
And here I was thinking you'd be focusing on the humanities, but that makes sense. Our people need the basic knowledge as a foundation. The humanities would really end up being our way of applying the knowledge of science to benefit our interests. And that's the way it should be. Isn't that what you've been saying? That humanities are a people's unique way of applying scientific knowledge to their benefit. So, it's really like you've been saying, after all, why can't Africans, like every other race, have their own identity and cultural way of doing things? Wouldn't it help white people and the whole world if we became a more productive people?
Of course, it would. So, what's the problem, you ask? My answer remains as consistent as it's been. What I can't motivation has changed. But be damn sure that originally it was because we were to be used as beasts of burden. They couldn't very well enslave us for that purpose and allow us our humanity. It's all too obvious that their objective required our subjugation as something less than human, and they were able to accomplish their purpose with brutal efficiency. So successful, I might add, that you and I have spent the day discussing whether our people are still psychologically imprisoned. And still, you ask me why they won't let us be. Don't you see that it has long become an integral part of the European way of life to regard African peoples as inferior and in need of direction to be productive? We are actually brainwashed to believe we were better off as the property of white men than the way we lived in Africa, and we've bought into it. So, why would they now flip flop and state that we have an identity and productive abilities of our own? I wouldn't be very surprised if some of us went begging to the white establishment to prevent the university from spreading lies about history. Without mental emancipation, our people might be liable to think our it's the point we've been making that even though we won't admit it, we feel ourselves inferior and unable to succeed without whites, whether as our colonial rulers, as investors, or tourists. The truth is that we don't think we can survive without them.
Isn't this why we need the humanities of Africans and African descendants?
Now you've got it. That's precisely why we need to build our structure on a foundation of natural sciences. The humanities provide our personal stamp on our scientific knowledge. So, with our foundation of natural science in place, where do we place our priorities?
What comes after the natural sciences? Agricultural science? It's not something I've given any thought, but I still have agriculture high on the list. This would be my guess.
And you'd be right, agriculture. We couldn't be serious about an institution of higher learning specializing in our mental emancipation that couldn't feed itself. Our foundation in science must necessarily teach us the most organically effective way to produce the nutrition we need. One of the reasons for selecting estate hermitage is its fertile soil and water. Isolation and natural beauty were also influencing considerations. The most cursory observation will indicate how the land supported sufficient community. And as it's imperative, we begin with science. It's also essential we make ourselves self sufficient and sustainably so. We can't, for instance, outgrow our ability to feed ourselves. Our target of 20 to 25,000 enrollment will only be reached because we grow from the inside out with hard work and disciplined commitment to purpose. That purpose is the building of an institution for the mental emancipation of African descendants. Whites, Asian, and everybody else will be allowed to be a part. The single criterion always being black mental emancipation. Among anyone willing to be a part of that mission can roll up their sleeves and get to work.
I didn't think you'd allow whites. Aren't you afraid they would subvert the mission if only to create confusion?
As I've tried to explain, I think our biggest problem will continue to be with the reactionary assimilated ones amongst us. No bug bites as hard as your own. But I can't imagine us having significant numbers of whites wanting to be part of this venture. Should they come, I'm sure we'll be able to find more than enough work for all comers. Of course, the university will be run exclusively by conscious African descendants and those aspiring to be. I would anticipate controversy as a result of these qualifications for leadership position in the institution, but there can be no compromise with mental emancipation. If ever there was a so called black thing, this will be it. The mental emancipation our mission seeks only fits one people, that's us. It would be an impossibility for one race of people to give mental emancipation to another.
I understand what you're saying and I agree. I especially like the idea of the university producing its own food to become self-sufficient. I most definitely agree that a critical component of mental emancipation must be the ability to produce and supply our needs as an alternative to our fixation with growing from the outside in. I willingly confess that I didn't think we could have a viable economy without the participation of whites as tourists. I can't speak for Rafi, but I certainly couldn't see us making it without white tourists coming here to spend their money. Seriously, it might have been my assimilation, but without sugar cane, bananas, or some export crop. I was totally convinced, not just us, but that the whole Caribbean depended on white people.
You
Sorry.
weren't the only one. There must be more than 25 million of us right here in the Caribbean. Incredibly, we can't find a way to make a productive return out of so many black people without it's not just you. Virtually every African descendant policymaker in our region faithfully believes tourism to be our only answer.
I would have to agree. If we're
Yeah.
convinced that we're an inferior people, how can we be expected to survive without our superiors?
If we would only listen to ourselves, tell me I'm wrong. Don't the same leaders who are incapable of generating the ideas that don't involve whites happen to be the same ones claiming how desperately we need education?
For true, you know you're right. Those same good for nothings who have us with this stunted growth from the outside are the very ones saying we need to develop inside. But how the hell are we going to develop on the inside when they're consciously convinced of this territory is us, and that development must mean enlightened education and not the miseducation they swallowed and now insist the rest of us must be spoon fed? See, you've got me all riled up again, and I was doing so good. Just tell me about this university with its solid foundation. Where do we go after we get the agricultural program? Which of the humanities would be next?
If it was left to me, however, I'm prepared to yield to the experienced educators amongst our conscious people. Professional educators tell me that history is a social science, and I find that to be most problematic. Can you tell me what is social science?
I really don't know. I can only assume it to be one of the sciences that deal with society, like political science, I would guess.
But are the social sciences a science? I have always understood science to be knowledge as opposed to belief. Knowledge that can be proven as objective and factual, not belief, theories, or superstition, but information that can be independently proven by analysis or experimentation. So, to my way of thinking, social sciences are humanities by another name. I just don't see how information that can't be proven can be called scientific, much less a science. Whether it's history, political science, economics, or civics, which are all called social sciences, none of them can be proven to be objective and factual, with absolutely no scientific foundation. As I've tried to explain, this is the basis of the courses of study we call humanities. They are literally the objectification of a people's identity. In simple terms, humanities are a nation's way of cementing
Mhm.
its identity and culture for its own unity and preservation, and they memorialize that nation's way of life as in the way subjects like political science or economics are studied or applied in America as opposed to Japan. Every people, every nation has the right to interpret the humanities as it best serves their needs. And this is certainly what nations do. Only subordinate don't have humanities of their own to serve their interests.
Wow, that's something else I wasn't fully grasping. Only now I'm understanding what you meant when you said humanities were culture. So, just like the language of a people is different, so are the rest of the humanities. Only the natural sciences are absolute and universal. They don't change from country to country and people to people. They're the objective, unchanging truth. And conversely, the humanities are the special ways in which we categorize the culture of a people. Their language, political science, philosophy, and economics are but the different aspects of a people's culture. What a revelation now that I understand what you're saying.
So it wouldn't be a problem if we reduce our curriculum to science and humanities.
No way. I agree with your classification. Why confuse ourselves with a term called social sciences? It's either science or it isn't. But then, as you said, the professionals in the field would probably love to explain the difference to us. It's neither here nor there for the purpose of this conversation.
Good thing, because I'm not up to an academic debate. Those high flung theories of the scholars frustrate me more than anything else. And now that you've gotten your mind around these humanities for what they are, I can try to finish this thing. As I've said in the simplest terms, humanities are the study of a people's culture. The different courses of studies are but the groupings of the relations and activities of peoples into different classifications. Whatever the whatever the people or nation applies, it becomes an integral part of their identity. So it must be understood that American humanities, for instance, are not the same as those of another nation. All independent people or nation must necessarily have their own humanities. If they don't, clearly they're not an independent people or nation.
That's just common sense. Every nation has its own habits and genius. And what better way to demonstrate it than with their humanities? And now I can see where I was misconstruing the concept. As you said, I still saw psychology and the humanities based on some classical origin. Like classical music as compared to African music, and theirs being the original source. I know, you don't have to say anything. I understand it. I'm just trying my best to explain the convoluted thinking I brought on myself. And now that I'm understanding how consciousness works, I'm truly amazed at what my particular condition will have me thinking next. Imagine that after all that I absorbed today, I still make the European the primary source.
Not to worry, it's nothing to pressure yourself with. As you said, consciousness is not a computer. It's always on its, not mechanical. Given time, it will grow and develop to astonish even you.
It's not a pleasant thing but to realize that but think as if you didn't.
Let me say we've built a solid foundation with the natural sciences and a sustainable flow with agriculture. It's time to deal with the blocks and mortars to complete the structure. Yes, I'm referring to the humanities that will actually define the essence and identity of our mental emancipation with courses of study. They are the disciplines of the very political, legal, economic, social, and cultural institutions that will formalize us as a civilization. Call them our government, our legal system, our national business model, our schools, sports, entertainment, and cultural events. These are the institutions that define a people and a nation, and the study of these institutions we call the humanities. So you can see that it's a people's culture we're studying when we take up liberal arts or the humanities.
My God, it sounds so demeaning when it's spoken. I'm just going to have to get used to it, but to consciously realize that my entire life as a student was spent learning about the people who conquered us is not a good feeling. You make it so graphic. It feels like I'm experiencing it. And to rethink how we all rush to get the liberal arts courses. I'm too embarrassed to tell you about the courses I took at UVI. But I can confidently say this much. I know the panoramic landscape you've been trying to show me. We have no identity. So we have not, well, no. So we
Mhm.
have not
So we have not,
institutions. No, we
right,
have no
no
institutions
institution.
of our own.
Hmm.
And therefore we have no humanities of our own to study. And the corollary is that if we developed our own humanities in our own university, we'll be able to produce graduates able to develop institutions of our own to lay the foundation of our identity. So simple and straightforward, and yet so difficult to grasp. Is that the curse of mental slavery?
You started this discourse by challenging me to explain why our leaders seem so incapable. While I insisted we are not an inferior people, it took you a while, but with your own words, in your own style, you have answered your question. And we come to the end of She
She and
and
me.
Me. Lord have mercy.
Yes, I give thanks, give
Wow.
thanks, give thanks, give
Yeah,
thanks. That was
yeah,
definitely a
yeah.
marathon,
That was
but we
a
did it.
marathon.
We did it.
Yes.
We did it.
All I
Yes.
say.
Um, little over.
An hour and a half.
Yeah.
No, the whole fun since we started the online.
This portion that we was maybe 2 months.
I think that was the
We
longest
started in
one.
August, I think, reading this.
I'm not sure, but
Yeah,
that was the longest part of the book that we read.
yeah.
Yeah. So it was
August or
a long
September we
time.
started because we've been reading from since.
Yeah, August, I know you're doing it. In
Yeah,
August for sure.
yeah. We
July we
start.
start.
Yeah, but we started reading this book in January.
I'll check. I'm not too sure,
Yeah, we started
but
reading this book in January. Actually, one Wednesday a week. Actually, we were reading it 3 Wednesdays a month because we skipped one Wednesday because there was another thing that Shalima had commitment to.
well, the Sacred Council of Elders.
Elders, yeah. So, but anyway, Brother Mario,
So
what a piece of work. And I think I
that's
got.
just a couple hundred pages out of 800.
Well, I gonna continue the reading, sir. But the one thing I wanted to really just like say, and I want you to kind of really dig a little deeper because I think that was so genius to have. Like when we talk about independence, right? And I've always stand in opposition to tourism and all of that. I've never been a fan of that. And I think at one point in time I thought about like, yo, a very similar idea with a technical school, you know, that would attract people from the different foreign islands, to come in. I just think the university idea, like the level of what do you call it? Activity, economic activity. You're talking about little over a quarter, maybe a little under a quarter of our current population attending a university. You understand?
Mhm.
Imagine how something like that could stimulate an economy and provide, what I'm saying, the basis to kick off everything else.
That's the point. You're not listening to yourself. That's what we're saying is that combine an aluminum refinery,
Mhm.
and an oil refinery, and it doesn't do as much for university
Right, 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 right,
because again, it's the difference between the inside of cultivation,
right,
not
right,
sahid.
right,
You
right,
see, when we bring in these things, it's we are developing,
right, right, right.
and we just become like, the mechanical widgets that make the operation work. We just at best we are just gadgets in the labor force that they use and train to achieve their goals.
Right, right,
And this is what we discovered through David Hamilton Jackson and his group as the generation after
Mhm.
the Great Fire burn, and that he is like well under the American
Right,
than to work for the
right.
So the Virgin Islands can be
but what come before them that America again without saying this specifically, were preparing for our
Mhm.
all you have to do